Well, thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be back at JICA. As many of you know, we've had a long-term relationship with JICA, going back to my working with Madam Okada when she was at the UN, and having strong cooperation with Columbia University. Madam Ogata was particularly, obviously, with her career, committed to multilateralism and to an agenda of human security. And an essential part of JICA work is, and her work, was putting human welfare at the center of development. And human security and human well-being was and freedom was an important component of well-being. And those are the themes that I'm going to be talking about today. So let me begin with a central theme of my book, which, some people may have been surprised I wrote a book about the road to freedom. And that sounds like a topic that philosophers ought to be talking about, or political scientists, not economists. But let me say in the beginning that those who are training in economics know economists have long talked about freedom and relationship between economic and political freedom. In the beginning, early part of the 19th century, John Stuart Mill wrote a famous book called On Liberty. In the middle of the last century, Milton Friedman wrote a book called Capitalism and Freedom. And Friedrich Hayek wrote a book, the title of which my book is a ripoff of. He wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, arguing that excessive government intervention, and he thought almost any government intervention was excessive, like the attempt of government to maintain full employment, make sure that everybody had access to healthcare. He thought all that was excessive, was setting the world, countries on the road to authoritarianism, you call serfdom. One of the reasons I wrote the book is to explain that he was 180 degrees wrong. That in fact, you see the rise of authoritarian populism, as in the United States, rising from governments doing too little for citizens to protect human security, to make sure that everybody has access to a job. So what I want to begin with is a definition or a concept that'll be familiar to economists of what we mean by freedom, and that is the freedom to act, the freedom to do things. Somebody who is at the point of starvation doesn't really have freedom. He does what he or she has to do in order to survive. And the object of, so anything that increases the opportunity set is an expansion of freedom in that sense. And the object of education is to increase individuals' capabilities, again, to expand the freedom of the things they can do. The object of the transfer of technology to a country is to expand the scope of things that the country can do, expand the freedom of the country. And so at the heart of, these are ideas that are really at the heart of development assistance, that part of the distinctive aspect of the way that JICA has provided development assistance is that it's focused on not giving fish, but teaching how to fish, uh, on giving people the capabilities to do things, and in that sense, fundamental sense, expanding their freedoms. So that's why an agenda really of focusing on freedom is really the same thing. It should be at the center of a developmental agenda. Of course, it's more than just the transfer of technology or uh, providing more education. More broadly, what separates developed and developing countries is not just a gap in resources, but also a gap in knowledge. And when we say gap in knowledge, it's not just technical knowledge, it's, you might say, broader institutional knowledge, social knowledge. And one of the things I'm going to come back to is one of the issues that are very much on the table right now is what kinds of institutions best promote development and freedom. So in many ways, the development agenda over the last 30 years has shifted from just resources to knowledge, institutions, in this broadening of the agenda. And I'm going to talk about one other further way in which it needs to be broadened. I want to, though, before getting into that, note that the international arrangements have not always been positive in advancing this agenda. Well, I'm very strongly in favor of multilateralism, and I'll talk about that more later. Sometimes international agreements are not really solutions to problems of externalities. You know, we think of it, cooperation, multilateral cooperation, as trying to deal with problems of climate change where there are externalities, or public health where there are externalities where disease will go from one country to another. But a lot of multilateral agreements are more about the exercise of power than they are about solving for problems of externalities. And what happened in the pandemic illustrates that very vividly. Because during, first, one aspect of freedom, opportunity, is having good health. If you can't survive, nothing else is possible. So access to health is an important ingredient to human security, human freedom. But in the pandemic, this pathogen, COVID-19, was spreading around the world. And we had the technology to protect. It took a while to develop it, but it was developed in record time, partly because of government investment in the mRNA platform, and then government support for taking that mRNA platform and developing a COVID-19 vaccine. It was done in record time. But then the US government made a very big mistake. It gave the intellectual property rights to two private companies, Pfizer and Moderna. And these two companies had one objective, not the health of the world, but profits. And they wanted to maximize their profits, and they made it very clear that their profits were more important than lives. South Africa and India said there needed to be a waiver on intellectual property related to COVID-19, not only on vaccines, but therapeutics, masks. Uh, and if that didn't happen, the process of issuing compulsory license, which had the same effect of a waiver, but that transaction costs were enormous, and it would take so long that people, thousands of people, would die. And so there was an urgency in having the waiver. Now, I was part of a group of people that worked hard to persuade the US government, President Biden, that a waiver was the only moral thing to do. And he supported it. Not fully, but he supported it. But three countries at the WTO refused. And they refused, and they refused, even though more than 100 countries said it was important. And so we wound up with what was called vaccine apartheid. And so what we did is we used, you might say, international law, the WTO law, in ways that disadvantaged the poor and resulted in tens of thousands of people dying. And of course, millions more getting the disease and hundreds of thousands probably being hospitalized. So the international agreement, multilateralism, worked to protect the profits of Pfizer and Moderna, but didn't work for the benefit of the world. Didn't work for the benefit of those in developing countries. It was not even in the interest of the United States or Europe, because while the disease festered in the developing countries, there were more mutations that occurred, and it was at least a risk of more people coming, a more virulent form coming and hurting all of us. But the asymmetry between the enforcement of international law against poor countries. South Africa was ready to produce the vaccine, and they were told, don't do it, you'll be sued. So poor countries had to obey the law. But what we've seen in the last year is that powerful countries do not obey the law. The President Trump has ripped international law to pieces. He's disobeyed every international agreement. And without any repercussions, countries are rushing to negotiate an agreement with him. They're not saying, you are a violator of the international law. That's what they should be saying. They're saying you're violating international law. But that's not what they're saying. They're saying, be nice to me. Treat me a little bit better, and I won't criticize you for violating international law. I'll be quiet. And in the United States, they say, I'll be quiet. Don't deport me. Don't arrest me. Don't harass me. So what is happening is not only the violation of international law, economic law, the rules-based international, but the most fundamental principle of international trade that has existed before the WTO since World War II. And that's the most favored nation principle. And the most favored nation principle is really a principle that underlies economic efficiency. It says we call it the single price, and it's the basis of the first fundamental theorem of welfare economics. If you don't have a single price, markets don't yield efficient outcomes. So it's destroying the validity of the argument for the efficiency of the market economy. So what he is doing is undermining the long-established principles of international trade and the principles of economic efficiency. All for what purpose? In order for the richest country in the world to try to grab a larger share of the surplus for the gains from trade. It's exerting power. So when I say the multilateral system is under strain right now, what we see is that power is being exercised against the poor countries when they want access to vaccines, but not against the powerful countries when they want to violate every rule of international law. Well, I want to, that's all by way of background. I want to shift now to the importance of human security in terms of the relationship to the freedom agenda. I want to begin with making an observation that researchers, psychologists, and economists have made that when individuals are confronted with insecurity, poor individuals, it's very difficult for them to engage in thinking, in particular long-term thinking. It absorbs all their mental energy. It's some wonderful experiments on how people's cognitive processes function in the presence of stress. And so insecurity really does affect the ability of individuals to function. So in that sense, insecurity really constrains their opportunity set. It constrains their freedom. There's another aspect of a related way of putting this. One of our truly great presidents was Franklin Delano Roosevelt, FDR. And he gave a famous speech called the Four Freedoms speech. And one of the freedoms that he emphasized was freedom from hunger, because he understood the consequences of deprivation. But he also talked about freedom from fear, which is security. So there are many aspects of insecurity: physical insecurity, health insecurity, job insecurity, retirement insecurity. What I want to emphasize today as part of the development agenda is that even poor countries can provide security. Not obviously at the same level that rich countries, but relative to their standard of living, they can help provide security. So the human security agenda is not inconsistent with being poor. And there's some real successful countries that have incorporated social protection and security into their economic social framework. One of them is, both of them are island states, and I think the reason small countries are more successful is because there's more social cohesion, and they understand the importance of solidarity. They see the effect of insecurity on their neighbors, on their relatives. But the two I spent some time talking to are Barbados and Mauritius. But South Africa is a larger country, and in their constitution, they have provided things like housing. access to housing. And the Supreme Court has said, yes, it's part of your constitutional rights. Now, obviously, not housing at the standard that you would have in America, but housing relative to the standard of a middle income country. So I think it is important as development practitioners for us to convey the message that human security is part of development. And we have to work to develop the institutions that provide that kind of security. One aspect of insecurity that all of us should be concerned with, and more concerned with, is climate security. And this is obviously, it's a global multilateral problem, but it's increasingly a problem in the developing countries because they are among the countries that are going to be most adversely affected by climate change. I think it can only be addressed, it needs to be addressed, it can only be addressed through multilateral. It's a global public good and requires collective global action. But of course, it's an increasing problem because one of the worst polluters, the United States, has said, as an official part of its policy, we believe in increasing pollution. Grill, baby, grill. And has said, Trump has said that climate change is a hoax. Now, Donald Trump is not a scientist. And I don't know if he, I know he doesn't know economics, but I also know that he's even less well. In Wharton School, we're supposed to train him in economics, which is where he got his BA. He never tried to study physics. But if he had studied, I was on the IPCC in the was one of the lead authors of the 1995 report. It was very clear 30 years ago that climate change was a reality. It's not a hoax. It's man-made, and it's something we need to do something about. But the 30 years since then, it has accelerated at a pace that we did not expect 30 years ago. Well, what has happened in the United States has helped crystallize, I think, a whole set of issues that I want to now talk about, issues related to freedom, the rule of law, and security. One of the reasons that the rule of law is so important is it protects us against the capricious actions of government or the capricious action of other powerful actors. Each of us has limited power, but we need to be protected against the exercise of power by others. And that exercise of power could be, most importantly, from government, but it also could be from mafia, from other bad actors. And what societies have done is gotten together and say the only way we can protect ourselves is to create an institution we call the rule of law. That individually we're not powerful, but collectively we are, and collectively create these institutions which we call the rule of law, due process. Somebody can't just pick you up off the streets and deport you to El Salvador if you're an American citizen. But Donald Trump says he can, and he's been doing it. People with black masks on, no identity, in black cars without identity, picking up U.S. citizens off the streets and sending them away. Usually we don't get them back after a court fight. But can you imagine the fear that our people are feeling? Can you imagine the fear in now Minneapolis, which is being occupied by ICE, where ordinary citizens, people are saying, I'm a US citizen. They don't care. But if you're not a US citizen, there's no recourse. So the I've been wearing a badge saying, keep your hands off our students. We try to protect our students. And we've attracted some of the best students from around the world, but they now are living in an atmosphere of fear. And a large fraction of our faculty are not U.S. citizens. We've strengthened the United States over the last 50 years, since World War II, 80 years, has been it's attracted some of the best people from around the world to come study at our great universities. And now they are afraid to speak out. So what we are losing is academic freedom. Academic freedom is itself an institution. We talk a lot about free press, free speech. We don't talk enough about academic freedom. And why is academic freedom so important? Well, there's an old expression from Lord Acton about power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Why is the free press so important, free speech so important? You need to be able to criticize the government if it's doing something wrong. Well, academia and research institutes, I put it in the same framework, are part of the societal control mechanisms. Well-functioning societies want to have people to think about whether the society is functioning the way it should be functioning. Most people in our society are busy doing the business of making society work. They're making goods, they're farming, they're manufacturing. Our society has decided it's a good idea to have a few people, not very many, who are just devoted to thinking. It's a wonderful privilege to be among those few. But you have to ask, in terms of designing society, why would you do that? Why would you have people like me who, you might say, do nothing but think? I'm not working. I'm not working. My hands aren't getting dirty. Why do they do that? It's really important to have, the people spending both time thinking about how our society works, how a developing country works, how our institutions work, how to make them work better. It's a privilege, it's also a responsibility. And that is why academic freedom is so important, because academic freedom says, we're going to give you those resources to think, but we're also going to give you the freedom to say what you learn. Because there's no point of having somebody spend their time thinking about it and then say, oh, but by the way, when you find out something, don't tell us. The whole point of our being there is to tell, to express that. It's uncomfortable for those we criticize, just like the press is uncomfortable to criticize. And the difference between Bill Clinton and Donald Trump couldn't be clearer. I worked with President Clinton. He was nobody likes to be criticized. And the press criticized him a lot. And he thought it was very unfair. But he never said the press was the enemy of the people. He understood the role of the press, and it did. So I I have just a few more minutes, so I want to go quickly on. Um, the um, the thrust, as I said before, of modern development economics has been emphasis on good institutions, the rule of law, property rights, independent central banks, which are now under attack in the United States. One of the hard questions that all of us who've been engaged in this worried about for the last quarter century is how can we build good institutions, or at least institutions that are good enough? We don't look for perfection. How do we go about creating them, or how can they be sustained? And what has happened in the United States has, in many ways, thrown all this up in the air. Because we thought we had good institutions. We are in a very precarious position. Some people say, well, if you survive, that proves that they were good. And my response is, I don't like living that close to the edge. I would have liked been much happier if I had more confidence that they would. I'm risk averse. I want more security. And so our institutions, while they've worked mildly well so far, have not worked well enough. They have not protected our universities. We have laws against what Trump did to our universities. He violated those laws. We have laws against what Trump did to USAID and dismantling our development. We have laws against it. He violated those laws. So what is very clear is, well, our legal system is not sufficient to protect in the short run. And let me say, the costs of that are enormous. The shutdown of USAID is estimated to result in somewhere between 1 and 2 million deaths a year in Africa. Those people are not going to come back when we restore our democracy. They're dead. And there was never any thought about the human cost of what we were doing. No public discussion, no democratic discussion. Congress said, we created, we want to give aid. We want to, and even the Republicans said that the PEPFAR program was an important program. He ignored the will of Congress illegally, but he did it. So what is clear is the system of checks and balances has not worked. It worked in the way that we had hoped. So the question is, how do we interpret what is going on? I want to give two answers very, very quickly, because I think it gives insights into policies going forward. The first is, we allowed in the United States too much inequality. When you have too much inequality, you have a breakdown in social cohesion. You wind up with a more divided society, and you have too much power at the top, and economic power gets translated into political power. And nowhere could you see that more vividly than the picture at inauguration of Donald Trump surrounded by America's oligarchs. America has become an oligarchy. And Musk destroyed USAID without even asking a question. As the richest person in the world, he thought he had the right to destroy it, rather than pay attention to the rule of law. So the first important lesson is checks and balances are not just matters of the structure of government, but the structure of society. We have to make sure that there are now concentrations of economic power within society. The second point is good institutions come from and can only be sustained by the right mindsets. A mindset that really understands democratic processes, rule of law. And two, we didn't educate Americans enough in understanding how important mindset is, the value of the rule of law, why we talk about it. Too many Americans thought as long as I have enough, my salary is going up, that's all that's important. All I care about is my income. No sense of social solidarity, no sense of what is a good institution and what makes for a good society. And that brings me to the final topic. I want to put all this in a historical perspective. That is the Enlightenment, at least looking at it from a Western perspective. The reason that we have higher standards of living today than we did 250 years ago was the Enlightenment that said progress was possible, that we had human agency. That's what we could do, we had freedom to do, that we could learn about nature from science. And then if we learned about it, we could help control it. And that we could create human institutions that would enable us to cooperate, work together. We were moving from a simple agrarian economy to a more complex economy. And we needed institutions like property rights, the rule of law, and that we could, these could help us coordinate, and could help us work together. And by working together, we would have joint prosperity. Well, that was a change in mindset, how we viewed the world. And I believe that that change in mindset was far more important than the capital accumulation, far more important than that mindset is what enabled innovation to occur. And those innovations were raised our standards of living. They had been stagnant for hundreds of years, and then all of a sudden they started to increase. And it was a change of that mindset. Now, change in mindset is at, I think, the center of development. And the 2015 World Development Report highlighted this. And I have a book coming out called The Other Invisible Hand, with the team that wrote the World Development Report 2015, that discusses this in part in the context of development and the success of growth. Changes it, standard economics begins with the belief that preferences are fixed and unchanging. But we as parents know that we try to change our children. We try to make our children honest, think about others. We try to make them behave well, not to litter, the whole advertising industry is based on belief that you can change people's preferences. And yet, economics pretends that they are fixed. And there are many kinds changes in attitudes that are very important for success in development. Attitudes about the role of gender, about discrimination, honor codes in some society, fertility, antisocial behaviors. So successful economies require trust. And there are behaviors that facilitate trust and behaviors that undermine trust. And it's important for development practitioners to try to think about how can we try to create societies where people can cooperate together and through cooperation jointly increase the well-being of everyone. So these changes in mindset, in that sense, expand the opportunity set. They enhance security. One of the major sources of insecurity arise from one group exploiting others or having the ability to exploit others. An important part of mindset is recognizing that there is a need for a balance between collective action, individual action, cooperation, and individualism. And unfortunately, in some countries, including my own, we've gotten that out. And as I say, as development practitioners, when we come to developing countries, I think part of our mission should be to try to help them decide for themselves how to get this balance better than some of us have been able to do. And how, in doing that, to create societies that enhance individual freedom to act and enhance their sense of security and get pretty individual at the center. Thank you very much.